So I'm Cinzia Hardy, and I'm an independent producer, and I produce Classics Fest here at the Lit and Phil. I'm absolutely delighted on behalf of the Lit and Phil to welcome you to Classics Fest, our second edition. Last year was just a test festival, just a little pilot, which has grown probably a little faster than I had hoped for, but I think we're going in the right direction. And at this year's festival, we're exploring everything Ciceronian. It's a collaboration between the Lit and Phil and the Classics Department at Newcastle University. We've also been working with other partners, such as New Writing North, Alphabetti Theatre this year, the Fringe Theatre up the road, and forging links with Classics for All, which is very exciting. The festival wouldn't happen without our funders and our supporters, and without, I have to say, the amazing staff and volunteers here at the Lit and Phil. We wouldn't have a festival without any of those people. I do have to make a special mention, though, tonight to the Newcastle Culture Investment Fund, because they believed in the idea of the festival from the beginning and have just made an extraordinary award to us for this year to allow us to expand. And I believe we've got the Pen and Palette in tonight as well. Thank you if you're out there. I don't know you. I would love to meet you. The idea of the festival is that classics are for everyone, not just those who maybe were fortunate enough. They see themselves as fortunate enough as to have had the opportunity to study them at school. I certainly didn't. And we aim to make the festival as accessible as possible without dumbing down and get some top-notch, not just academic speakers, but artists, thinkers, people who can give talk about the classics through a new lens. So, before we start, I would just like to hand the microphone over and take my glasses off to Simon Corcoran. I got it right? Yes, from the head of classics at Newcastle University.
Thank you very much for that introduction. Well, in classics at Newcastle, we're delighted to be involved with this event, which of course shines a very good light upon the area of the ancient world that we all love and we all work in, and we all want to make sure is spread as widely as possible and shared as widely as possible, especially after the success of what happened last year. Unfortunately, Professor Federico Sant'Angelo, who would have perhaps been doing a similar presentation, I think, last year, has stepped down as head of classics and indeed will be leaving Newcastle shortly. He probably would have said some very intelligent things about Cicero because he is a late Republican historian. By contrast, I'm a historian of late antiquity, but nonetheless, the shadow of Cicero, which we'll be thinking about in the contemporary sense, of course, was very important also in late antiquity, where so many of the authors in Latin were trained in him and knew about him. And famously, Jerome, one of the most famous of the Christian fathers of the 4th century, apparently had a dream in which he was accused of being not a proper Christian, but a Ciceronian. Which you might think actually as an accolade rather than anything else. So it is a real honor, I think, for our department to have been involved in this. And I should like also to mention my colleague, Dr. Marta Garcia Morcillo, who has done most of the heavy lifting from the point of view of our members of staff in contributing to help arrange all of the things here. So I'd like to extend my thanks to her. Anyway, that's enough from me, but we are delighted that this is happening, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the evening, and there is a lot of lively and interesting discussion from all concerned. Thank you.
So I'm going to hand over to the speakers who will introduce themselves.
Hi, good evening, everyone. My name's Arlene Holmes-Henderson. I'm a professor of classics education and public policy at Durham University. you're not here to listen to me this evening. You're here to listen to Vittorio Bufacchi. And I want to start with a piece of good news.
Good.
In your literature about this event, you might have seen Vittorio listed as Dr. Vittorio Bufacchi. But he's just been promoted to full professor at University College Cork. So let's give him a round of applause.
Thank you.
So, Vittorio, could you tell us a little bit about yourself and your areas of expertise?
Yes. Now, I love to talk about myself, but before I do, I really need to make a statement about this beautiful place where we're staying, the Lytton Phil. We're going to be talking about Cicero, and Cicero has this wonderful quote. He says, if you have a garden and a library, you have everything you could possibly wish for. And I think there is some truth in that. There is a lot of truth in that. And there's something about libraries like this that just inspire you. And I think Cicero would just love something like this. Well, the first thing I should say about myself is that I'm a Roman. I'm a true Roman. I was born in Rome, which is more than you can say about Cicero, which is possibly the greatest Roman philosopher, except that he wasn't born in Rome. He was born in Arpino, which is this town maybe 30 miles east of Rome. And at the time, that was a huge handicap for Cicero. The Romans, people always think about the Romans as the great civilization and so on and so forth. And in one sense, yes, of course, but I mean, Rome was spectacularly violent. It was not an egalitarian society, and they would look down on anyone that was not born inside the walls of Rome, right? But I was, right? So I'm a Roman. What I'm not is, I'm not a classicist. I'm not a Latinist either. I teach philosophy, and so I come to Cicero more from the philosophical perspective, partly because I felt that the only ones that were really talking about Cicero today, you find them in classics department, and thank goodness for classics departments. Philosophy and classics, whenever governments want to save money and close down a department, it's always a close race between classics and philosophy. Who are they going to close first? But Cicero is studied in classics departments and very little in philosophy departments. So I wasn't taught Cicero myself at university. I discovered him myself. So I do philosophy, but I don't do ancient philosophy. I actually do very contemporary political philosophy. All my work, if there is a topic, is social justice. I write about social justice and mostly about social injustice. I work on human rights. I work on political violence. The book I published 2 years before this one was on COVID-19 and philosophy. It was possibly the first book by a philosopher on COVID-19. So I went from something that happened in 2020 back 2,000 years. But I thought it was necessary to do so. So, in other words, I'm a Roman, I'm a total fraud, because I'm writing about Cicero, when really I'm not a classicist.
Brilliant, thank you. So, interesting to hear that you come at this from the philosophical standpoint, sometimes the more modern, more political philosophy standpoint. How did a book like this come about? What made Cicero an attractive focus for this book?
Right. What's attractive about Cicero? Well, absolutely. So there are a few issues here. One thing is that not many people know about Cicero. When people think about ancient Rome, it's always the emperors. So there was this thing going on TikTok. How often do you think about?
Yes.
About the
Roman Empire.
How often do you think about the Roman Empire?
How many times a day?
Yeah, you're right. And of course, the answer for me is none, but I think about the Roman Republic all the time. And this is the thing, right? People don't think about the Roman Republic. And Cicero is important for the Roman Republic. The Roman Republic is the closest thing to a modern democracy that we have in ancient times. In the sense that we have defined and shaped institutionally our democracy pretty much using the Roman Republic as a blueprint, right? They had a constitution. They had a rule of law. They had elections. They had the Senate. That's kind of remarkable 2,500 years ago, right? So Rome was founded in 753 BC, 21st of April, so we're told, right? In Rome, in Rome we still celebrate the 21st of April. And then they had 7 kings, and then they realized that the kings couldn't be trusted, that they were always abusing their power. And then they said, okay, we're going to experiment with a new system, a republic, right? And it went on for centuries. And then it came to an end. And it came to an end because it was undermined by populist authoritarians, okay? And so, as someone who works in contemporary political philosophy, contemporary democracy and social justice, I thought we are actually approaching the same moment in time. We have a democracy, and maybe we take it for granted. Maybe we're complacent in our democracy, because you look around and there are powerful, sinister, populist, authoritarian figures who are trying to undermine our democracy, right? A democracy is based on checks and balances. The Roman Republic was all about checks and balances, right? So you elect sort of the highest political office, the consul, right? You only elect them for 12 months. Not only that, in the Roman Republic, you elect 2 at a time, because you cannot trust one person to have too much power, and one has veto power over the other, right? Checks and balances, right? And then you see what's going on in America now with Donald Trump, who's pulling the rug from any checks and balances, right? Executive decisions to everything. Forget the Congress, forget the Supreme Court. And so I'm thinking, that's where we are at the moment. And who was in ancient Rome in a position to understand that this was happening and devoted his life to trying to actually keep the Republic going? The Roman Republic wasn't perfect by any stretch of imagination. I mean, it was a slave society. You know, what more can you say, right? Women were not allowed to have a political life. Yes, there was a concept of citizenship, which is, you know, we adopt today. Not everyone had the same rights as citizens. The women have, I'm not, you know, there's a sense in which sometimes people idolize the ancient Rome, and absolutely not. And yet, still better than the alternative. The alternative came with Julius Caesar. We're going to talk about Julius Caesar. It came with the emperors. The emperors were dictators. You know, it was the rule of the one person without the rule of law. And Cicero was the person who saw it coming and did everything in his powers to stop it. He got killed for his efforts, right? Well, fair enough. But he was a philosopher, and he was a politician. He was a philosopher, and he became a consul. He had, for a moment, for a year, he had the highest role in the Roman Republic. And so as a philosopher, that's remarkable. There's no other philosopher in the history of Western civilization that has ever had that much political power. But his philosophy informs his politics and vice versa. And so I'm thinking, if there's ever a time when we need to actually read Cicero, it's now, because we're about to make the same mistake that the ancient Romans did. A few years ago, my kids started secondary school, and parents were allowed to sort of go in and look at the school, right? So the history room, you know, full of pictures, and there was sections on the wall on ancient Rome, 2 pictures, you can probably guess what those two pictures were. The Colosseum and Julius Caesar, because that's what it comes down to, right? Now, the Colosseum, fabulous, built by Jewish slaves and an arena where innocent people were being eaten alive by lions. Fair enough, let's put it up there. And Julius Caesar, because everyone knows Julius Caesar, right? He's the myth of Julius Caesar. So I go to a history teacher and say, that's interesting, but he committed genocide. Do you talk about this to the students? Why do we have, someone who's a dictator? He nominated himself dictator perpetual, a perpetual dictator, right? That was his. He says, I don't want to be called a king. I'll take. So I said, why not have a picture of Cicero? And the answer was, who? So I thought, right, gotta read the book.
Yeah. And they should have come here this evening because
there you
the
go.
Lytton Phil is full of people who want to know about and talk about Cicero. I want to pick up there on your comments about authoritarianism, because when you mentioned that, I could hear from the audience, some grumbles and mumbles, and it clearly struck a chord. So maybe you can tell us, what did Cicero do to defend the Roman Republic against authoritarianism? And what can we learn from him about being a citizen in the 21st century?
No, absolutely. So two parts to the question, right? So remind me the second part. But the first part is, what did he do, right? So he actually, and it's interesting because, so much has been written about Cicero. Right? We have 2,000 years of books on Cicero. And the picture you often get is of someone who's very arrogant, very detached, very superior, kind of elitist, right? And that's not the picture of Cicero that I have in my head. So there is something he did that often goes under the radar, right? So he realized that the people of Rome couldn't actually engage in philosophy because everything in philosophy was written by the Greeks, and it was written in Greek. And of course, the Romans, if you were part of the elite, you know Greek, otherwise. Yeah. And he said, actually, this is wrong. And a lot of what we know from Greek philosophy comes from translations that Cicero did from Greek philosophy to Latin. So much so that actually the Latin language at the time didn't have certain words for the Greek because there wasn't use for it. So he invented sort of words in Latin to express this philosophical thought. Now, and you think, okay, so what does this got to do with it? Well, this is the thing. Far from being an elitist, he actually believed that anyone and everyone can engage in philosophical thought. So, far from being an elitist, he was actually the opposite. But this is the thing, but why philosophy? And to me, and of course, I'm biased about this, I'm a professor of philosophy, but the way, the method of philosophy is actually politically powerful. At the time, and this is true of Plato and the Greeks, and it's true of Cicero, he wrote his text as dialogues. And dialogues are powerful because dialogues are places where different people with different ideas come together, exchange ideas, and there is an assumption of equality amongst the people in a conversation. Much more so with Plato, right? If you read a dialogue from Plato, "Oh, Socrates, what do you think about love?" And then you get 5 pages of Socrates telling you about love, right? That's not a dialogue. Cicero's dialogues are such that actually it's not often clear which voice is Cicero's. But what does that tell you? For Cicero, actually, democracy requires dialogue. And you have to teach people to engage in dialogue. And that's what philosophy is. It's a dialogue. Because the assumption is that no one has the right answers. No one holds the truth, but we come to the truth by working together. Authoritarianism is the opposite. You have one person who's got the truth, and anyone who speaks against the authoritarian figure doesn't live long, because you don't challenge someone who has the truth. And so, in a sense, dictatorships and authoritarianism are the antithesis of philosophy. And so one of the things he did, apart from everything else, and we'll come to it, is to actually suggest, okay, the Roman Republic, and he's got a beautiful phrase in a text called Res Publica. He says, res publica, res populi, which is the public thing is the people's thing. Or you can translate it as the public thing is owned by the people. And the idea that the state, the democratic state, is ours, and we are the people. And that is actually the start of the American Constitution, because they were influenced by Cicero, the Jefferson, the Adams, they were all. So the idea of we the people, we own the state, it's our state. And so the argument here is that the way that you fight authoritarianism is for us to actually get involved, get engaged, do something, because the authoritarians are taking away something that is ours. And so Cicero, in his own way, yes, he was a consul, but he was actually trying to get the Romans to take ownership of the Republic. And maybe there's a lesson there. Because at the end of the day, yes, it's the Julius Caesars of this world that bring down democracy. It could be the Donald Trumps of this world, but that's because people let it happen. And there is that complacency. And all we do is complain. Because, and Cicero was saying, this is on you. Yes, they're doing it. So that's the way that I read Cicero. What's the second part of it?
I think you've already covered it. What does he tell us about being a citizen?
Right. So being a citizen is actually recognizing that you have duties and not only rights. So when we think about citizenship, we think about, as a citizen, I have certain rights, my rights, and therefore the state should deliver. Give me this, give me education, give me healthcare, give me, my rights. And Cicero actually says, yes, as a citizen you have rights, you also have duties. And the last philosophical text he wrote was called De Officiis, which means on duties. And, amongst ancient scholars, there's the question of what is his most important piece? And, I would say it's on duties, because in a sense, everything that he's written about, ethically, it comes back to the fact that as individuals, we have certain duties and not only rights. And that's another lesson that I think we need to remind ourselves of, because people are often and always prepared to talk about their rights, and they never talk about their duties. Of course we have rights, but with rights come duties. And I think that's a strong message from Cicero.
Yeah, and it feels very modern. I spend a lot of time looking at educational policy, and policies for citizenship education aim at cultivating young people who can be active, participatory, responsible citizens in society, and that is about speaking, but it's also about listening. So Cicero feels very relevant in terms of preparing young people to play their part as global citizens. So you're probably getting the impression so far that Cicero was awesome, everything he says is great. I've got a bit of a controversial question for you now, Vittorio. It is a truth universally acknowledged that school students and teachers hate Cicero. Right? When you have to study Latin at school, Cicero is a prescribed author, and as one of the few Cicero fans in the education community, people always tell me he's so dull, he's so boring, he's so self-possessed and egotistical. So what can we do about Cicero's PR with young people?
Yeah. He really needs a PR manager. So why does Cicero have such a bad reputation? Now, for many centuries, he actually had a very good reputation. So his shares were up for a very long time, and they were actually attached to his rhetoric. So he was most, after he died for the next few centuries, it was the art of rhetoric. He wrote a manual on how to give speeches, and that kept his reputation going. Now, rhetoric is not something we teach anymore.
Some of us do.
You do, absolutely, and I wish there were 100 of you, but not in every school. So the art of rhetoric, and also rhetoric, it has a bad reputation now, because people understand rhetoric as, oh, this is a way that you can tell a few lies and get away with it. But actually, for the ancients, rhetoric was about ethos, as well as pathos and logos. And ethos is actually the ethics of it. So we kind of need to redefine rhetoric. But then at some point, people turned against Cicero, and there's this great scholar, German scholar in the 19th century, who wrote a history of ancient Rome in how many volumes? 10 volumes. But he was given a Nobel Prize for it, and he was spectacularly rude about Cicero. He called him a journalist, which is the worst thing you can say to philosophers and so forth.
Apologies to any journalists in the audience.
And the reason for it is really political, because in the 19th century Germany, they wanted a Kaiser. They wanted a Julius Caesar figure. They wanted an authoritarian figure. And so there was a political thing going on there. But since then, sort of Cicero's thing. And so we come to the 21st century. Now, Cicero's I'm not a Latinist, and people here probably know more Latin than I do, in fact, without a doubt. But his Latin is very difficult, right? So there is this ongoing joke, about, someone goes to a speech that Cicero is giving in the forum, and it's 10 minutes late. He says, "Oh, what did he say?" And friend says, "Well, we're still waiting for the verb, so we don't know yet." And there is some truth in that, unfortunately. So the Latin is difficult, and so there is this association that if something is difficult, therefore it's bad, and therefore it's boring. It is difficult, but that doesn't make it bad, and not necessarily boring. So that doesn't help. But also, I think, and I suppose it was one of the reasons behind writing the book, is actually telling students, we're not reading Cicero because you all should know what some people said 2,000 years ago. They're speaking to us today. This is actually relevant. This is actually very contemporary. There's one of the quotes from Cicero. He says, there is no more desolate and desperate state than the one where the richest are assumed to be the best. right? Wow, you know, Elon Musk, he's rich, therefore he must be good. No. And if you build a state around billionaires, what are you going to get? So there are things like that that are beyond time and place, and somehow that's what we should get to. Now, he wrote long speeches, and that obviously doesn't make it easy for teaching purposes. I don't know how many people here have read the Robert Harris trilogy. It's fantastic. I mean, having done a lot of sort of academic reading on Cicero, I think he's got it. He's really got it, and it's properly done. So, and it's exciting. So there are ways in which we can, but it's a difficult question, absolutely. But you know what? There is something about people attracted to the general that conquers the Gaul, that enslaves 3,000 people and sells them and makes money out of it, that throws people in gladiatorial fights. And there is that lure to dictatorship and violence, and we have to resist that somehow. Something came up. There was a lecture today at 2 o'clock. It was a wonderful lecture by Martha. And actually, one of the things that Martha talked about was how Cicero wrote about his emotions. And that got into a lot of trouble, right? So that it's remarkable how many of his texts survive today. Not only that, something like 2,000 of his personal letters. I mean, it's so much of what we know about that period in history comes from Cicero and his letters, right? And letters are personal, and the letters are quite emotional. So the letters were discovered in the library of Verona in the 1300s by an Italian poet called Petrarch. And that was the first time that they found these letters by Cicero. And people were very disappointed because it was very emotional. There was, he was complex, he was upset, he was depressed. And then something else that Martha mentioned in the lecture today, he was very, very attached to his daughter, Tullia. And she died during childbirth. And Cicero never recovered from it. I mean, he was heartbroken. And the way he tried to overcome the desperation is by writing about it. And he wrote the Tusculan Disputations, which are all about psychology and they're all about emotions. And actually, and this is that tells you something about ancient Rome and why it's not this idyllic place. The Romans looked down on emotions, right? So virtue, virility, they all come from the root vir, which means man. So it's a very masculine society, but the virtues are very masculine. It's the courage in war. It's, and to use a binary, which is obviously problematic, but just to say it, there's almost something feminine about the emotions, as opposed to real men that are out there sort of conquering and fighting. And of course, that binary distinction is silly for obvious reasons. But actually, how wonderful that someone in ancient Rome was not afraid to be in touch with his emotions. And actually, if there is one thing that I always look for in a politician, is emotional intelligence. And Cicero had it in spades. And wow, at a time when you're not supposed to. You're not a man. You're not a leader. You can't be trusted. So So you get the Julius Caesars of this world. You get the dictator perpetua. You know what? Give me someone who's heartbroken because he lost his daughter. I mean, to me, that's a real man. And that's what we should talk about.
Yeah, and
in schools.
we see Cicero's humanity in these letters. And we, as fans of Cicero, would say that, yes, this is an indication of his emotional intelligence. But teenagers reading Cicero's letters say, miss, he's just an oversharer. Right? So it's all about your perspective. Now seems like a really good time to pick up on the contemporary value and relevance of Cicero and have the surprise interlude, a treat that Cinzia mentioned, of some young people who have been working with Cicero and have produced something for us to enjoy. So I'll pass over now to Kirsten Luckens from New Writing North.
So lower the
Checking. Yes, here I am. Hello, I'm Kirsten. Thank you so much, Cinzia, and everybody involved in Classics Fest for this little interlude. I have been working with some young people who you're going to hear from, but let me stick to what's on my paper. Cicero said that a great leader should be like a good parent. Always putting the needs of the people ahead of their own ambitions, and never playing favourite by looking after one sector of society whilst oppressing another. So, with these wonderful writers, we have been discussing leadership, power, trust, corruption, and the contemporary issues that matter to them. And we've been using some techniques that we hope that Cicero and his peers would recognise. Everything from alliteration and anaphora, thesis, antithesis, big rhetorical questions, and of course, eye-rolling sarcasm. They have used these techniques and their thoughts to bring together a group poem, which I warn you, pulls no punches. I warn you. And it's looking at the ways in which they believe contemporary leaders are clinging onto and perpetuating actions and attitudes that really belong in the past, that we should have left behind us by now. So I've chosen for us an epigraph from Cicero, which is to be ignorant of what happened before you were born is to remain always a child. And I'm going to welcome them onto the stage now to perform this poem. Please welcome Bethany Mitchell, Maya Kuman, and Ryan Joins. Okay, guys. Thank you so much. This is Anachronism, an open letter to the leaders of the world.
When are you going to retire? You're very old.
We demand you get a grip on your egos. We demand you stop killing people and ruining people's lives.
What thing happened when you were little that made you support and commit genocide?
Have you done your research? We need competence, not conspiracy.
Stop the secrets. We need transparency.
We should be able to trust anyone with power over us. We need to understand the impact of climate change and how to contain it.
We need trees and shade, not tarmac and heat.
Squishy ground, not injured toddlers. Rainforests retained an absorbent earth, not forest fires and flash floods.
We need to swim in clean rivers, not tides of sewage.
You're watching us drown while you're sitting in your lifeboats. Stop shoving your pollution down our throats.
We hope you'll not be so anthropocentric going forward.
We need you to stop letting the whole world get exploited. Rights for all, not just those you anointed.
When they cheer for you, do you mistake it for love?
Have you thought about doing some therapy? We demand that violence and crime should be destroyed at its roots. Poverty and inequality.
We want more housing and less of the greedy landlords.
We want workers' rights, not super yachts. We need to stop the rockets and the billionaire blood sports.
We're asking for charity, not self-obsessed gluttony.
And where are the taxes going? We demand you repatriate all that was stolen.
I mean, if you're sending immigrants back, you might as well return the artifacts.
We hope the next generation will know better. In the years to come, we look for diversity, not division.
Will we live to see change, or will you be stuck in your ways forever?
We may not know what is to come, but we know what came before us. We are not children, and history does not bore us. When are you going to die? You're very old.
Right.
Weren't those young people amazing? So talented. So, Vittorio, can I ask for your reflections on the open letter to the world leaders?
I think Cicero would approve. Absolutely.
Gold star.
No, fantastic. And I mean, how true that we have to learn from the past, and we make the same mistake over and over again. But some mistakes are so big now that we may not even have the opportunity to make mistakes again. So no, it's powerful.
Excellent. So I'm going to ask one more question, and then it's your turn. So you've got a little time now to be formulating the question in your head, and then we're going to be opening up. But I guess we need to talk about the poster boy that you mentioned earlier, the elephant in the room, Julius Caesar. This is a talk about why Cicero matters, but it would be good to hear your thoughts on why Julius Caesar has become the poster boy in the classics class, in the history classroom, and also perhaps why we're so concerned to have one leader from the ancient world, which occupies so much of people's thinking time, and perhaps Cicero's in his shadow.
Yeah, Julius Caesar. So one chapter in my book is called "It's All Shakespeare's Fault," and tongue in cheek, up to a point, all right, because Mark Antony gets the most remarkable speech possibly that Shakespeare ever wrote, right? Friends, Romans, countrymen, lend me your ears. And it starts with friends, and we're going to be talking about Cicero and friendship on Saturday at 11 o'clock, because he wrote a whole treatise on friendship. So Mark Antony gets this spectacular speech, and where's Cicero in the play called Julius Caesar? He gets one line, right? He's actually at the butt of a joke. Did Cicero say anything? Oh yeah, he gave a speech in Greek. And actually, okay, you can't blame everything on Shakespeare, but then there were, Handel wrote an opera on Julius Caesar, and Cicero is just nowhere to be seen. So that is problematic. And what is it about Julius Caesar that is so remarkable? I mean, apart from the fact that he committed genocide into Gaul. And this goes back to what we were saying before. sometimes people just want an easy answer. So there are problems. Well, if we choose the right person, they will come and they will make all the decisions and solve all the problems. Well, it doesn't work like that, right? So, democracy is complex, democracy is slow, but it's slow because it's inclusive and because you hear all the voices, as opposed to listening to the voice of one person. Now, Mussolini openly often said that his role model was Julius Caesar, and for good reasons. It's someone who took over power through violence and concentrated all the power in his own hands, which is exactly what Mussolini did. So it's bizarre even to refer to it as a role model, but in politics, people kind of lose patience and they say, okay, maybe that's what we need, one strong person. And we just heard those three voices saying, have we learned anything from the past? I mean, how many times have we tried dictatorship and how has it ended? And yet, you're right, he's the poster boy. How many movies have they made on Julius Caesar? It was mentioned today, Marlon Brando playing Mark Antony. I mean, that's it, right? There was an HBO production called Rome. Yeah, a few years ago, which was actually was well done. And Cicero is actually a character there. I forget his name. The actor who played Cicero in Rome is the actor who plays Uncle Colin in Pride and Prejudice in the BBC, right? And so, I mean, he's a great actor, but it's hard to take Cicero seriously when it's Uncle Colin coming into the scene. So back to the PR. We need someone to actually do a production with Cicero at the center.
We need Imperium, the movie.
We did Imperium and the play, and which is what actually is part of the of this festival, which is fantastic. But yeah, it's our fault for taking the easy way out. If only Julius Caesar would come or someone like him and solve all our problems. I mean, we let that happen.
So we need the audience's help to change the narrative about Cicero in society. So consider yourself all ambassadors for Cicero now. Great. Over to you. Can you raise your hand if you'd like to ask a question? First question there. Yes, please.
Hang on a second. We've got a mic.
Just over here.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yep. Thank you. I thought it was really interesting about how you talked about Cicero having more feminine traditional qualities. And I wondered if you thought about how Julius Caesar is so prominent, because traditionally, historians, classicists, film producers are men, and perhaps the qualities that Julius Caesar had would be more appealing to the people who have kind of traditionally dominated our quite patriarchal society. And perhaps that's a kind of, have you got any thoughts on that?
I think that's a great point. Absolutely. So it's interesting how we kind of, each generation kind of repeats that same narrative, and we never break that narrative. And so given that the people in power in Hollywood tend to be men, they kind of reproduce that. I think it's a very good point. I mean, one way to break it is to actually break that very simplistic binary distinction, which is obviously false, the way that most binary distinctions are. Things are always more complex than that. But yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I wondered whether the extent to which Cicero's lack of military prowess was problematic for him and perhaps contributed towards this effeminacy because he wasn't a well-decorated military leader. Do you think that should improve his appeal in the 21st century? Because now we quite like people who don't go to war?
Yeah, well, no, it's a good point. So, in moral philosophy, there's a whole branch that deals with the ethics of war, just war theory, and actually, people often refer to Cicero as the first philosopher who wrote about what a just war was, which is kind of interesting. And there are people who argue that he was actually uncomfortable with the expansion of Rome and the way that it was creating all these colonies. Now, his argument was, a war is just if you are defending yourself. So if someone is waging war, then you should fight back. And in fighting back, then there is justice in your war because you're trying to protect yourself. But there's no justice in a war where you're just trying to take someone else's territory. And to say that in ancient Rome, when Rome was all about expansion, it's quite remarkable. So I wouldn't say that he was a pacifist, because at the time, war was inevitable. And inevitable sometimes for good reasons, because if your crop fails, you starve to death. And crops would fail for whatever reason, and people, before starving to death, they would wage war and steal the crop from the next village. I mean, that's how history unfolded at the time. So a lot of wars were dictated by desperation. From the Romans' point of view, it was interesting because, and they have a history of people conquering Rome, and they said, how can we stop this? And they thought, okay, if we control areas around Rome, then it's like a buffer zone, and they will not reach Rome because we can sort of have the wars out there. And so it was kind of a preventive war. But then, of course, it got out of hand because they just started conquering for the sake of conquering. So even something like that, there's something really contemporary, because now we're talking about war. Is it just? How? When? And actually, Cicero himself was asking himself those questions. Thank you.
What other questions do you have? Yeah, just in the back row.
Yeah, one of the things that I find extraordinary in America at the moment is the way that Trump has sort of tamed the media. You've got all powerful news organizations. I mean, in Watergate, they brought down the president. But Trump, in a sort of naive way, seems to call people mainstream media and talk about fake news. Was there any sort of equivalent to what he's doing in the time that Cicero was around?
Right, excellent. So propaganda. Actually, Julius Caesar was very good at propaganda, right? So some people argue that the first newspaper was started in ancient Rome, and it was, so Julius Caesar would be waging war against Gaul, France, and Germany, and he would send back to the Senate his bulletins, and these would actually be written and posted. And so the Romans could actually see how Rome was expanded. Is that right? Yeah. So from that point of view, actually, Julius Caesar realized the power of, of propaganda. But on the question of news, so we go back to Cicero's the Officis, right, his final text on duties. And he says we have two predominant duties. We have a duty to truth, and we have a duty to social justice. When he talks about a duty to truth, and it's kind of interesting because his argument is, well, actually truth is something that we can only seek, that we never hold. And that it's actually, it's almost a postmodern conception of truth. There's always this idea that the ancient had strong ideas, this is the truth. Actually, Cicero didn't believe that. He thought that the truth is something that you never actually achieve, but you can only, by process, you get close to it. And his argument is, we have a duty to seek what the truth is. Now, a duty, it's kind of an interesting argument here because we have a duty to tell what we believe is the truth, and that's important. But there's also, and this is where he flips it, and then he says, but citizens of Rome, you also have a duty to seek the truth. And if you believe the first thing that you see on TikTok, well, I'm sorry, that's just convenient, but you actually are not fulfilling your duty. Because truth takes time, it's a long process, it takes energy, but you actually owe it, not only to yourself, but to the Republic, to make sure that you only hold the truth and not what's convenient or whatever first thing you've heard or whatever's in your interest. So it's kind of interesting what's happening in America now because it is a war on truth. And if one of the things that undermines democracy is undermining what truth is. So actually what Donald Trump is doing from his point of view makes sense. But we let it happen. And we can't let it happen. Because if we lose truth, then we lose it. Yeah.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I think the kind of one-sided selective approach to sharing news from the provinces back to the empire is definitely something which is precedent, I guess, of what we're seeing today, but also coins were used as a way of spreading news. And so the people in power could put whatever idealistic versions of themselves they wanted on those coins, together with images of what might be happening in parts of the empire, having those coins act as the news flow around the empire, the currency, literally the thing that's running across the empire. So I think that there's lots that we can learn, but I hope we don't see Trump on a US coin anytime soon. Right, who's next? Yeah.
Just ask one. Let me give you a little You said, I think relatively early, that it's certainly in the West getting a lot worse. And of course you have the example of Trump. But presumably Cicero's not widely read in, say, Russia or China, is he? And Russia had a little burst of liberality, but that's been a one-party state for over 100 years. Similarly with China. And so it's getting worse for the West, but I suppose large swathes of the country have been anti-democratic and anti-liberal for a considerable period of time. I'm just wondering whether there would be a Cicero's take on, say, for instance, those countries. Presumably he's not read at all, is he?
I wouldn't be an expert on that question, but was it last year or the year before, there was the World Congress of Classical Studies held in China.
Yeah, Beijing.
Yeah, so it's interesting. It surprised a few people, but it was massive. Now, I don't know exactly what was covered, but certainly it was. And my book is being translated in Chinese at the moment. So it doesn't mean anything, but actually there is an interest in anything and everything in China. I'm not sure about Russia. I mean, Russia's relationship with the West has always been, it sort of fluctuates, because during periods like Catherine the Great, she would invite the philosophers of the Enlightenment, and she had conversations with Voltaire, and then sort of it comes. So I wouldn't give up on Russia just because of what's going on at the moment. Partly because I think it's lazy to be a pessimist, and we almost have a duty to be positive, in the sense that I'm not going to give up just because it's the easy option. But obviously, I can only speak for what I would know, which is the Western world. And we're talking about Trump, and Trump is an easy target. But speaking as an Italian citizen, Giorgia Meloni I am spectacularly ashamed of the fact that someone who is openly a neo-fascist is a prime minister. That, in some ways, is a lot worse than Trump. The only difference is that she's still held in check by the Italian constitution. And she hasn't found a way to go around it. She's trying to rewrite the constitution to create a precedent which would hold a lot more power. And changing the constitution is always a bad sign. So you have Meloni in Italy, you have Orbán in Hungary, you could have Le Pen in France, you have Slovakia. It's not just Trump, and it's not just one fire. I'm not going to say anything about England.
Well, we do. Yes. Thank you.
Yes, at the front. Cinzia, I need you to wave at me when it's time to stop. Okay.
We've talked about modern-day Caesars. Can you think of a modern-day Cicero that we could put our hopes in?
Modern day Cicero, fantastic. Well, you ask yourself, can you name any philosopher who's a contemporary politician? Damn. So I don't think you have to be a philosopher, to be a modern Cicerone. It would help. I wouldn't mind, personally, but not necessarily. Although there are people who studied philosophy who then went into politics, obviously. But I think what it is actually politicians who believe in dialogue. And that would be a good start. And I think there are. You want me to name people, huh? When I, sorry, no, but it's a good point, but this is part of the conversation. It is a conversation, and no one should feel that they have to agree with anything I say, because that's the beauty of it. When I teach philosophy, I always start the lecture with, you don't have to agree with anything I say. In fact, if you disagree, that's so much more interesting for everyone. So that's the rule of philosophy. So when I wrote the book, not this one, the previous one, on COVID-19, I was asking myself that question. Okay, there's a moment of crisis, and actually you can tell a lot in moments of crisis in terms of the true essence. And I know people would not agree for reasons, but I think if a hypothetical scenario, a time machine, and you could end up anywhere in the world at the start of the pandemic, I would want to be in New Zealand. Yeah, I think Ardennes was quite spectacular as a political leader. You know, not that she got all the decisions right, but how she came to make those decisions. And you know, there was 6 months into the pandemic, I think 23 people died in New Zealand, right? Well, we had thousands. She picked up the phone and she called the families of those 23 people to apologize to them because she couldn't save them. And, wow. Did she read Cicero? I don't know. But I think that's quite spectacular. Now, who do you think?
So I can give you a British name of who I would suggest. Somebody who came from non-elite beginnings, somebody who is great at giving speeches, somebody who takes a philosophical approach to politics. Peter Swallow MP. He's MP for Bracknell and Reading, and he is a former classicist. So he was a classics postdoc at Durham University and was elected to government last July. I think we will be hearing a lot more from him. He's not a Ciceronian scholar. He prefers Aristophanes, so he also has good humour in the chamber. But if we were to think of a modern-day Cicero, I think Peter Swallow's it.
Now, classicists don't always make good politicians.
Peter's going to change that narrative. He's not the same colour as the previous one. Right, any more questions? Yes.
Hello, I wanted to ask a more general question about the relationship between contemporary philosophy and reflections on Rome. So in the Enlightenment period, you had the Roman Republic held up as this model for a radical re-envisioning towards a more equal society. But in the following centuries, you see Rome being taken up as an example, not by those pushing for more egalitarian society, but those on a conservative idea, like Michael Oakeshott, or the Baudelaire's Stoicism that you see on some parts of the far right today. So I was just wondering what your thoughts might be on why that is.
Right, that's a great question. And you're absolutely right. So the Enlightenment philosophers, many of them were very strongly influenced by Cicero. So John Locke read Cicero, Scottish Enlightenment philosophers read Cicero. So Cicero would have been and of course Montesquieu. So when we think about the system of checks and balances, that was very much put in institutional format by Montesquieu in terms of separations of powers. But he was also influenced by Cicero, right? And the founding fathers of the American Constitutions, they were all reading Cicero. So there's a lot going on there. But in a sense, what they were doing is actually putting in place a system of checks and balances, of constitution, of rule of law, of citizenships and rights, which didn't exist. And so they were looking at the Roman Republic. The thing about ancient Rome is that there are many centuries of it. There is the Roman Republic period, and then there is the Empire period. So there is something and the opposite, which is part of the Roman. And so there is a question, you can pick and choose which bit of the Roman Empire, or of the Roman history you're interested in. So I mean, that's part of the answer. But I think there is this, unfortunately, there's this idea, and Oakeshott you mentioned, which is interesting. So Michael Oakeshott, who was professor at the London School of Economics for many years, and he's considered one of the sort of the luminaries of British conservatism. This is where classics, and I'm interested in your views on this, people are attracted by that elitist, or some people are, that, that idea of you have to know the classics and that makes you sort of stand out and it's what we do at Eton, this is what we do at Oxford, and yeah, so
highly problematic and untrue. I would say to that, yeah, we need to disentangle the study of classics from the elitist image that it has, the baggage. It's only for wealthy people, it's only for clever people. We've got members in the audience tonight from the charity Classics for All, which is doing a brilliant job of widening access to classics in the state-maintained sector across the country. So I agree that there are people who want to talk about their classical education as a badge of honour, but my life mission in widening access to classics for everyone at all stages of life, including in prisons, is actually to change that narrative and to say, just like maths, just like geography, anyone can do classics. Woo! Okay, I'm looking to the balcony to see if there are any questions up here. I don't want you guys to feel like you're being ignored.
I'm quite interested by what you said about citizens' duties. I hadn't heard of that beforehand. So I guess, besides seeking for the truth and using your democratic rights, what other civic duties do you think we should all do?
Yeah, no. I'm glad you actually asked that question, because I was actually thinking back to what I was saying before, and I realized I missed something out. So that's fabulous. What are our duties? We seek truth. We uphold justice. One way in which we uphold justice is by political participation, engagement in public discourse, not for our private interest, but for the public good. So there is this tradition in political philosophy which we refer to as republicanism. And republicanism is different from liberalism, because liberalism is very much about individuals using their rights to promote their self-interest. And a democracy is where we all we vote for our self-interest and we have a right to do so. Now, there's a lot to be said for it. I'm not against liberalism, but it prioritizes the individual interest over the public good. So much so that individual interests are enshrined in rights. The Republican tradition, and it goes back, you have Machiavelli, Rousseau, but it really goes back to Cicero in ancient Rome. It's actually arguing about your duty to make your republic the best it can be. And sometimes you have to make sacrifices for the public good. And it's so rare that you hear that in contemporary political discourses, talking about, this is actually the right thing to do for us, because, and the environment is clearly an important, that idea of the public good. And there are sacrifices that you have to make at the individual level for the sake of future generations, because we owe a duty to others in our society, others in future generations. We also have duty to strangers. And you do that through political engagement. And I don't think people engage in politics, apart from often you vote for whatever party's in your best self-interest. So this idea that you should do something for the common good, that was very much part of the Roman Republic idea, and Cicero talked about it, yeah.
Excellent, thank you. So I see some people here tonight clutching copies of Why Cicero Matters. Vittorio, maybe you could end by giving us 30 seconds on how this book is different to other books on Cicero, should people wish to purchase it this evening.
Well, first of all, it's written by someone who's not an expert on Cicero. You're not going to find any other book on Cicero that mentions Boris Johnson and Donald Trump and Farage and a few other contemporary, and Meloni, a few other contemporary politicians. So it's written from the point of view of where we are now and why Cicero matters to us today. So that really is the essence of the book. Cicero was also very funny. He made a lot of jokes. You'll have to read it, but he actually made a joke about someone very powerful. The joke didn't go down well, and that someone very powerful actually got him killed. So, but he was. I mean, extraordinary character in many ways, but with a sense of humor and how refreshing.
Absolutely. So it's been my absolute pleasure to be in conversation with Vittorio Bufacchi this evening. Could you join me in giving him a round of applause?